I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for this special roundtable conversation, and let's get started. I want to start by telling you that I was listening to a town hall conference call last Friday evening with Senator Richard Blumenthal and Congressman John Larson. And during the call, they named three major historical events. The first one was they talked about the 1918 pandemic. Secondly, they talked about the 1930s depression. And finally, the civil unrest after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. They made the connection with those events and made it to what we're experiencing today. The COVID-19 pandemic, unprecedented unemployment, and the tension and unrest that we have that has stirred deep emotions and touched off protests after the killing of George Floyd. The first three historical events happened over the course of 50 years. The three that we're experiencing now came together in just a matter of weeks to create a perfect storm, one that is challenging, inspiring, and has the potential to serve as a catalyst to change racial and social injustice, inequity, inequality, and violence among all peoples, especially those of color. Today, we are gathered as a group of administrators from across Connecticut from different levels to serve as members of our first roundtable conversation to discuss how we as leaders build our own cultural competence to recognize and address the racial disparities, explicit and implicit biases, and blatant inequalities facing our state, our country, and our world. We watch and we hear the desperate cries of protesters, and we listen to their inspirational calls for change. As school leaders, we're called upon to have difficult conversations with all stakeholders. But what do we say, and what must we do? How can we build culturally responsive classrooms, schools, and school communities? So I'd like to begin by asking each of the members of our roundtable to introduce themselves, describe your school community before the COVID-19 virus, and what you're seeing and feeling now. What is it like in the trenches, battling the perfect storm?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Missy Bavaro-Grande, and I'm the acting superintendent for the East Granby Public Schools. My history and education is in large, diverse environments. I raised my children in a large, diverse district, and I work in one of the smallest, if not the smallest, pre-K 12 districts in the state with far less diversity. So my experience kind of runs the gamut. The situation in our district, I think as educators, we all do our best and firmly believe that we are being proactive. We have done a lot with our district in terms of working with the Anti-Defamation League. We have a partnership with the Farmington Valley Resilience Grows here. We have done work with the State Department of Education in looking at cultural competencies within our classroom and examining our own biases. Our students have also been involved in looking in theater and also activities around social justice. However, whenever a situation, whether it's local, state, national, occurs, such as the culmination with George Floyd, we have to re-examine how we respond. We have to re-examine our practices. So as a district, you know, and I think one thing I'm going to say, and I'm sure all the educators will agree, you know, I think our generation of students right now, they are a generation of change. They are vocal, you know, whether it comes to school violence or social injustices, they are leading the pack. So even in my very small district of East Granby, our students formulated and led a peaceful rally this past Sunday, which garnered about 200 students. 200 community members. And as a district, we firmly believe that this is a community issue. So our school district is partnering with CREC to do a needs assessment, and we will be looking at developing a 2 to 3 year equity plan in which you know, the teaching and the learning does not close at our school doors. So we will be looking to involve the entire community as well.
Great, thank you, Missy.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Uwe Sunday. I'm the principal at Windsor High School, and it's my 4th year. By and large, before school closures, we were having really what was amounting to be an amazing year. Windsor High School, in and of itself, and the district as a whole, is a very diverse school district with a major part of our population being Black students. So equity, even long before I arrived here at Windsor, has been a hallmark of the work that Windsor as a district has done, and it's been a priority in everything that we do. Obviously, the closures were unexpected, and one of the things that we do know as educators is that the pandemic really kind of illuminated a good amount of the inequities that exist certainly outside of the walls of our school building. It has not been easy, but one of the biggest and brightest spots that makes me extremely proud about being affiliated with Windsor, and specifically Windsor High School, is that our students have a general spirit that's completely directed at social justice. So it weaves through everything that we do, and our kids are vocal. And we're going to talk a little bit about this a little bit later, but our kids, at least at town level, are leading a lot of the efforts to bring awareness to the change that is necessary, that needs to be done. And it's even more heavier for us because in exactly a week, we'll be graduating almost 300 seniors and sending them into this world. So this work is important, and I'm happy to be able to join some outstanding educators across the state today.
Thank you, Louie. And next, Dan.
Good morning. My name is Dan Miletti. I'm the principal of Bloomfield High School. Neighboring towns of two of our other panelists in West Hartford and Windsor. Bloomfield High School and Bloomfield School District is a rather small district with close to over 95% minority, with over 80% of that of our students being from African or Caribbean descent. Bloomfield, if it is not, is one of the most racially segregated districts in the state of Connecticut. We are not diverse. So the school closure and has impacted our students and staff. But in addition, the recent events that have taken place with social justice issues has really brought the town of Bloomfield together. We, on Thursday night, a candlelight vigil was held on the town green. Over 750 people attended. A lot of our students were there. For me, being the principal here and being in this building for 13 years as administrator, last six as principal, it hurts. It's been a very painful time because this is what we fear for any of our children, and trying to speak to our young men and women about the inequities of the world. It's always been difficult because of their outlook and their perception of what is, the reality that it is inequitable. So listening and building relationships is the key. And when speaking to my own two sons, who are 14 and 13, they basically grew up in this building. They were 1 and 6 months old. They basically grew up in Bloomfield High School. So they've been, the talk was made at a very early age with them, as it pertains to social justice. And I'm just glad to be part of this panel. I'm glad to represent Bloomfield, the town and the district, and all of our students, parents and families. And I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dan. Nilda.
Hello, I'm Nilda Irizarry. I am the middle school principal in Farmington Irving A. Robbins Middle School. It is my first year as an administrator. And I kept thinking I had the whole year planned out, that things would work out well for me. And I realized that being a leader is not about having a plan set in stone. It's really about responding and comforting and supporting your faculty and your staff and being there for students and families. So I've learned so much about leadership, in this short time. For me, I've always worked in environments where no one looked like me. So I started teaching in Fairfield, Connecticut. Then I was a curriculum leader in Simsbury, Connecticut. And now as a principal in Farmington, it's always difficult because I feel like we're having these conversations about race and our student experience. And I wonder, are the people at the table the right people, the most knowledgeable people? So as I became a principal here, I tried to diversify who we were listening to, who was brought in to these conversations. So we had, before COVID, a parent panel where we brought in our open choice families just to talk to us about their experience, predominantly families of color, and they just expressed to us what their children were feeling in our classrooms. At the district level, we also had professional development about race relations. We looked hard at our data, disciplinary data, and just focused on what could we be doing to support all of our students in Farmington. So these conversations started. We had student groups, parent groups, and the murder of George Floyd happened. And we didn't necessarily know how to respond because we had all of these groups that had been talking about race in America. And some groups were in shock, some groups were appalled, and then some groups were almost like resigned. Like this was just more of the same. So it was hard as a leader to try to comfort all of those different groups. We did have a small rally in Farmington where middle school students participated and spoke out. And I was just very proud to see middle school students taking a stance and just saying things like that our experiences need to be shared, all voices need to be heard. And it was very peaceful, but also very empowering to watch the kids in that talk.
Great, thank you, Nilda. Tim.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank CAS once again for inviting me into this really important discussion. My name is Tim Salem. I'm the principal of Scotts Ridge Middle School here in Ridgefield. This is my 10th year here. Prior to that, I spent many years at Danbury High School, which is obviously a lot more diverse than the current place that I'm in now. But I think prior to the COVID outbreak, similar to some of the descriptions that you heard from Missy and what they're doing in East Granby, when she was talking, I felt like there was a lot of similarity. We work with the ADL. We use our advisory program to teach cultural competencies. All of those things that we know are integral and important into expanding perspectives and deepening understanding. And I think it's been a huge challenge for us, probably like everybody else in this remote environment. In the last,
I think we may have lost Tim. Okay. Okay, so Tim, we will come back to you, and I'm going to move us on to Joy. I'm going to have you take it away, and we'll see if we can get Tim on the phone.
Okay.
Joy.
Hi, my name is Joy Wright, and I'm the principal lead learner at King Philip Middle School in West Hartford. This is the 7th year of my principalship there, which is interesting that all of this interesting things happens in the lucky year of 7. I don't know what that looks like right now, but I am really excited to say too that I've chosen, I think about what you said, Nilda, and I feel like I wish I had that courage to work in different districts. I have purposely over my career wanted to work in districts where there was diversity, because I knew that I might be the only one there of color among staff. So I needed to have students of color around me to feel like I could be effective. And so I've worked in Windsor. I started out as a teacher there. And then for CREC, I did try Wallingford, which probably was the least diverse, and then came to West Hartford. And so, I really am proud of our district as well. There's a very clear focus to be culturally competent. That's a board goal. We have been working for the past few years on making sure that professional development was part of that, and has continued to do that. And this year as a school, we've really kind of said, okay, the teachers are getting this work and this professional learning, how are we making sure we hear student voices? And so we've really been focusing on that, partnered with the National Conference for Community and Justice through their Bridges program, through their training, to make sure that they could come in and train a group of student leaders, and looking at how do we kind of help them to have these conversations, and not just with each other, but also with our staff to tell their stories, to educate us from their perspective. You know, we are about 40% of students of color, and I think about our staff as a whole. You know, I've got 97 certified staff, and just 11% of us are certified staff of color. And then of my 54 non-certified, I'm at 14%, right? And so we are growing. That's a district goal too, to grow. When we have hires, are we hiring so that students see mirrors, right, of people in front of them as well. And then if that's not possible, or when that's not possible, we should all understand that kids feel safe in our schools, in our classrooms, safe to share their story, safe to have conversations that are difficult. And so as was said here, the most difficult part of this piece with George Floyd, Aubrey, Breonna Taylor, like all of that, is that we're not there in the building. Like, we can't hug them, we can't be with them, we can't sit with them at lunch. Staff members are isolated, right? And so those conversations. So we did have a student forum last week where students kind of shared how they were processing this information, asking what could they do, talking to us about what we could do better as a school to help them feel you know, comfortable and safe. And then we're having a staff forum for our staff around how are we processing this information and sharing resources. You know, I think this is a great opportunity. I really feel like it's generational, that this is a generation that's going to say it's not enough. There's that level of caution doesn't exist. And so while it's frightening in many ways, as a person of color, as a leader of color, trying to figure out that balance, right, of what do I share, what don't I share, how that's going to be perceived, not just by my staff, but by my parent community. I think it's an exciting time to really push the gas and demonstrate why we cannot stop having these conversations around equity and social justice.
Tim, are you back?
I called in so it wouldn't go out, if that's okay.
That's perfect. Yes. Go ahead and finish your thought.
I apologize. I'm not sure exactly
Okay.
where I went out. Just listening to Joy, I'm just proud to be a participant in this discussion, and looking forward to hearing more from my colleagues around this topic. And hopefully now the reception is okay and I can fully participate. So I apologize.
No problem. We're glad you're here, and we're glad you're back. And we have one more panel member before we move on. Sherrod.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sherrod MacNeil. I'm the principal of Pumpkin Delight Elementary School in Milford, Connecticut. And I just want to take a second and say, you know, I'm glad that we had the very slight technical difficulties that we had with Tim. It brought some smiles to the faces of those here in this meeting. And I think we need that. You know, this is a very sensitive topic that we're all dealing with, but I am absolutely encouraged by the number of people here in this meeting who are willing to get down and get dirty and do this work. You know, I'm going to piggyback off of what Joy said a second ago, that this generation that we're responsible for kind of leading, they are fearless, Joy. And they really want results. And I'm encouraged by that. But they need guidance and structure on how to use that, how to channel that energy. So I think that's where our work lies here. And it does my heart good to see everyone here on this panel. Before this, so this is my first year as the principal of Pumpkin Delight in Milford. Before that, I was the principal of Franklin Elementary School in Stratford, Connecticut, where we had 86% minority, nearly 90% free and reduced. Happy to say that, you know, this past year, we established ourselves as a school of distinction by the state of Connecticut. So great things have been done through our work there at Franklin. Before Franklin, My whole career as a teacher and an administrator was in Ansonia, Connecticut, which is also a very diverse population. So I love the fact that we can all come together. I think that we have a common mindset. And then just to answer the question, Rosie, you know, before leaving physical brick and mortar school, Pumpkin Delight was, so as the first year, you know, you want to establish the culture and learn your constituents. So we were doing that, and our students, we were working with them to promote student voice. We were working on agency, both within our students and our staff, and we were grappling with offering effective types of feedback, which I think is important for our discussion moving forward. We have to teach our children how to talk to each other. And we have to create a forum and a platform for them to express how they're feeling. And we need to teach our children how to listen. So those are the things that we were working on before leaving physical school. And then, you know, in my opinion, I think that the district, as did other districts in the state, or a country for that matter, we had to take a step back. You know, some of the initiatives that we were working on when we were physically in school took a back seat to how do I teach and learn digitally? So one of the roadblocks that we ran into as a school was, even though we're learning virtually and digitally, I'm still going to attempt to teach you the exact same way. It was a very, very large learning curve, and we had to take some steps back. But I would love to say that we've made progress through this. You know, all of these districts in our state had to learn how to digitally create school districts. Very few people had any idea on how to do that.
And you're so right. We've been through so much in just a few weeks, and I'm like speechless listening to all of you. I wish we could continue this conversation all day, but I'm going to start asking questions and we'll see how far we get. And I'm sure we're going to have to do this more and more. I know your response is going to be different at different levels, elementary, middle, high, and the district level, but what do we say to students to help them understand what's happened over the past several weeks, such as why are so many people peacefully protesting? Why are others looting and committing violent acts? And especially why was George Floyd killed in this manner? What do we say? And anybody jump in?
I'll jump in. This is Dan. I think the first and foremost in conversations with students and parents and staff is we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to recognize that this is an issue, and talking about it. And we need to continue to talk, but not just talk. We need to take action. Being there to listen and learn myself has proven to be very powerful. Working in a school, as I can probably say about everybody in this room, you know, I have 2 boys of my own, but I also have 547 other kids that I'm responsible for, and that I treat like I would want my own 2 sons treated, fairly, respectfully, building a trust, but being able to have those conversations. And looking at our demographics of mostly students from African or Caribbean descent, I learn more from them when we have those conversations and we have those honest conversations that are built on trust and relationships. And recognizing that a lot of our students, especially at the high school level, have experienced injustice, whether it be in stores, in the community, with law enforcement. And this has really hit home for our community and our kids. And just being honest with each other and talking about what the issues are has been very powerful. So that's, you know, from a high school perspective and a father's perspective, you know, that's been my response.
I can second that, and maybe I should really kind of ask if there's a disclaimer. How raw and authentic and open can I be here? And I think that's really the centerpiece of this is we have to be willing to be vulnerable, raw, and authentic, and really what's going on in our country. Now, Rosie, to answer your question, I don't, and maybe I'm blessed in the sense that I walked right into this at Windsor. I referenced earlier that our students have a social justice spirit. There wasn't much that we had to say to our students. There wasn't much because our kids are not blind. They're not. They're researchers. They've lived it, as Dan mentioned, and they understand history. The worst part is that they are actually now, unfortunately, living through history. So there isn't much. Our kids will educate you on this if you're willing to listen. And I can say that very specifically about Windsor High School. What did pain me, though, is I could not give a response for why these actions are happening at such a prevalent rate. It was particularly hard for me as a Black man who tries to do everything right. And there's much that is said in education when you're in a position of influence, not to impose your values, but beyond the leadership work and the pedagogy work that we do here, I do tell our kids to do everything right. That has been something that was very important to me when I was hired here, was to help change the way people perceived our students. And in turn, that would hopefully change the way they perceive themselves. And with every social media post or every video clip that shows people who are seemingly doing the right things get brutally murdered, it's hard for me to tell 300 teenagers who are about to walk into the world that this is what people fought for. Because it happened at the turn of the century. It happened after the World War. It happened in the 60s. There were grandparents, great-grandparents who said, we need to continue to do this work because it's important. So our children and their children don't have to experience the same thing. The fact of the matter is there's something that has existed, and it's the dark side of America's past that has just really just wove through the hands of time, that we have not found a way to shake. And there's a part of me that has a little bit of guilt that we have to burden our kids with this. So yeah, there has to be action. The fight can't stop, and we need allies. Black people are never going to stop fighting this fight. But white people, we can sure use your help. We can sure use your help. And you need to talk to the people who have the ability to impact things from a systemic level, at all levels of governance, whether it's at the managerial level, administrative level, executive level, political level, and you have to ask them to make some changes. You have to ask them to make some changes, and you have to hold them to it to make these changes. And for me, those changes have to be focused on three things. First and foremost is safety. The second piece has to be equity. And then the third piece has to be access. The fact that Joy can cite that in Connecticut, we have about 530,000 kids, and almost half of them are students of color, but 9 out of every 10 teachers in the state are white, is probably problematic. And we need to do better, and we can do better. So we should keep our ears open and keep our eyes open and listen to our kids, because they know a lot more than we give them credit for. And if we're willing to partner with them, they can join us in this fight.
Thank you. A lot to think about right there, and a lot of things that we got a lot of work ahead. Anybody else want to answer that question, or are we ready to move on? So how can we help all students understand, empathize, and connect with social and racial justice, especially with the plight of George Floyd's of the world? We can listen to them. What else can we, after listening to we thought, what else can we do? How can we help them empathize and connect with the social and racial injustice that's happening?
Well, I think we have to provide opportunities depending on where they stand to educate them. And to me, we start with the curriculum. Like as leaders, how do we do that? Or where they spend a majority of their day, what does that look like when they walk through our halls? What do they see? Do they see mirrors of themselves or windows to other people if they're not of color? What are they reading? What does the curriculum focus on? When there's conversations about, who gets to go to the bathroom? This comes up a lot, right? Like, I couldn't go. I had to say, wait, but she let that other girl go who's not of color, right? What are we doing to think about how, when we have issues in the classroom of discipline, is it disproportionate? Like those are the things that I think we need to build opportunities for kids to have conversations about. Empathy just isn't, it's not always natural. So we have to provide opportunities to give kids the ways to empathize. We have a community service organization, as I'm sure many schools do. I can't tell you the number of families who say, when my kids served at that shelter, what they realized about their own privilege, their economic privilege, what they realized about their families, what that looks like, how it kind of restarted something. We have to provide those kinds of ways for kids to access opportunities to be empathetic through what they read, what we teach, the experiences that we can hone for them at our schools. I think those are important pieces to start.
I just want to follow up with what Joy said. We have an equity leadership group at our middle school, and it's led by 2 fearless teachers. It's a very diverse club, almost 50 plus students, and they create tasks. They run professional development. They did run professional development district-wide, and they talked about race with teachers. They led restorative circles, explaining what it feels like being a student in classrooms and moments that the teachers at times miss that could be great moments for conversations and teaching and learning experiences. So our students are really pushing and leading that conversation, and it creates a nice through line to Farmington High School because there are so many social justice clubs and groups there that are pushing and moving the work. We also run the professional development sessions for parents. So that's, we host a monthly forum. It's at 6 o'clock. And one of the forums we held this year was about race. And I was nervous because you host a party, you don't know who's going to show up to talk, but we had 65 plus families come. And it just struck me because I think people want to talk about race. They want to learn more, and our students led those forums. So I think someone said it earlier, our kids want to talk about this, our families want to talk about it. Are we creating the spaces in our buildings for those conversations and the forums for those conversations?
And I think that, the views and the perspectives of our children come from the experiences and the environments that they come from. So education is so important, and that's why it has to go broader than just the school, however. To Nilda's point, I'm sure we can all say we've had many, what we feel are fabulous parent programs, and you have a very dismal, group that attend until something happens. Until something happens. And I think now this is the time to pull in your community. I think this is the time to pull in those kids, and they will get their parents in. I know even in our very small district and with not a lot of diversity, there is a rally going, and this is the time to do it. And this is the time as leaders where you dig your heels in and say, yes, we are doing this. And yes, we are going to have these tough conversations. And yes, we are going to speak about Black children and racial injustice and prejudices and biases. And yes, we are going to do that. And sometimes that's, tough in our positions because we kind of walk a fine line with what some of the community expects, but this is the time to do it. And I think we have to, like I said, we have to dig our heels in and, as a, joint effort, as a locals, as state, we need to come together and have these conversations and, help our students and educate our adults as well.
You know, I just want to echo what Joy and Nilda and you know, lastly, Missy said. I firmly believe that as a principal of an elementary school that the curriculum is so important. And, you know, just to add on that, for example, art, you know, taking a more expansive view of art and the things that we value as people and as a society, including images of what we should look like, how we should dress, what our hair should look like, and show them that there are different types of art and different types of expectations, and beauty can take the shape of take many different shapes and forms. Also want to add that understanding the importance of narrative and perspective are extremely important. You know, with everyone having exposure to social media and the news, I think it's important to teach our children to have a certain level of discernment.
Thank you. And I totally agree. I'm getting so many great things that I'm hearing. Now's the time. Our kids are fearless. We need to dig in our heels and do this. And so I guess my question is, if we're going to get our kids talking, if we're going to really dig our heels and do this, what support systems do we need to have in place within your schools for students who may feel the effect of racial and social injustice and inequality?
I can chime in on that. I think first and foremost, and I've probably heard a few of my colleagues speak about it today, is just creating a safe space. It's creating a safe space. And then obviously school connectedness is important, and that looks different in every environment. But as long as every child has at least one person that they feel they can connect with to be able to talk to, that plays a critical role in that culture really being procured in your school. I am going to speak from a biased perspective because prior to my work in administration, I served for a long time as a school counselor. And I think a lot of credit has to go to any kind of student support office. You know, the work that school counselors do and the skill set that they bring, social workers, psychologists, can really help to begin to shape the conditions that allow for safe spaces. For us at Windsor High School, we've always told our kids that they have a voice and they should feel comfortable talking about it, but not everybody always gets a chance to do that. So in many cases, we may have to model it as leaders. We may have to model that. And then the last thing that I would highly recommend is the idea of creating conditions for safe spaces through restorative practices. So on top of the equity work that we've been doing and the personnel support and technical supports that we do have, we are beginning phases of implementing really actually district-wide restorative practices. And most of you are aware of what restorative practices are. There's some foundational processes that allow for vulnerability and healing. So those are some suggestions I will put on the table for this work.
Yeah, and Uwe, I absolutely agree with the restorative practices. I also think it's important for us to let our teachers and our staff know that you might not have the answer. Like I'm reminded of Stephen Covey's, one of his habits, seek first to understand. You know, we want to give the answer. Sometimes we listen so that we can respond, but we need to listen to understand and listen to really hear. And we might not have the answer, and that's okay, because I think we're going to work through this together.
I think that's an outstanding point. The previous two speakers were right on with using counseling and support services through social workers. And I also think structures like advisory, where you just have open and honest discussions with kids. And we can't be afraid to navigate those discussions with students. We have to get after some of the inherent biases that students come in with. We just have to. And we're not going to improve students' ability to deepen and widen their perspectives and understandings unless we're able to have those tough conversations. And so I think advisory with a trusted adult is certainly one aspect. I also think we have very talented teachers in our classrooms that can help navigate some of those discussions in profound ways. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to try to build as much of those things into what's coming in the fall, whatever the fall looks like. But I think it has to be on the forefront of our discussions this summer.
Can I just say something too? I love advisory as a model. I think we just have to make sure with our adults that we don't make assumptions and provide safe spaces for them to say, I'm uncomfortable, I don't know what to do, how can we partner? Because sometimes, you know, with an advisory, unless you have a prescribed program, we've taken to creating scripts sometimes just to help do that, because I'm, you know what they say about making assumptions. And so I don't want people to feel uncomfortable with already an uncomfortable conversation and it to go wrong, right? Because then that's going to make it harder for the staff member to kind of step out as well as the student. So I agree. I love advisory and model. I think we just need to make sure where our teachers are and to create a safe space for them to say, I'm out of my element. How can I get in there? Who can I partner with?
And that's a huge concern. I think we hear that a lot from staff, that they don't feel equipped. They're not a counselor, they're not a social worker. And they have a really, you know, it's challenging for some of our staff to, I don't even want to say lead, but to even be a part of some of those conversations.
And I always have to think about, what does it feel like for students in classrooms where the teacher is uncomfortable having those conversations, because students of color don't leave their race at the door when they come into school. So every second they're in our building, they're acute, especially if you're a student of color in a predominantly white suburban district, you're acutely aware of your race at all times. So, you know, yes, teachers might feel uncomfortable, but we as leaders should be setting the tone that conversations about race, you being aware of who you are, how you racially identify, what students are experiencing, because by the time they come to middle school, they're arriving with racial trauma, some kind of experience that's hurt or harmed them from the previous school. And in order for them to even feel safe in your classroom, they need to see you as an ally. They're experts at reading character. And if they don't feel that you are in this for them and you haven't articulated that, they're going to be so guarded that they're not even going to share their story. And when you do have these advisories, they're going to opt out and sit quietly and not engage the way we expect them to. I'm fortunate that I have teachers that are anti-racist. They'll say it to groups of students. We hosted a forum where I was just encouraged that I heard a 13-year-old girl say, it's not enough for us to be kind to each other, we have to be anti-racist, and we have to find the systems that are racist in our school. And the accountability was pushed back on me because the student directly asked me, like, what are we going to do as a school to make sure that we are actively anti-racist? So I just want to push teachers to have those kind of conversations. And it's, yes, we're all uncomfortable, but our kids' experience in school matters most.
No,
I couldn't say that better myself. Nilda, I agree with you. And I think that if we shy away because the conversations are uncomfortable, then we're just going to be back into the same situation that we were in. We really have to push that uncomfortability and open up the dialogue. And it's incumbent upon us as leaders to help guide that. I agree.
Our students aren't willing to engage anyone in a conversation unless they trust them.
Right.
So we need to be able to place an emphasis on relationship building and what that looks like within our school communities. It's the foundation of everything that we're talking about here, right? So we do want to create a safe space, but within that safe space, like, what do relationships look like from child to child? What do relationships look like from child to adult in the school community? So I see that as being the foundation of everything, of this work moving forward.
And we got to look at that from a curriculum perspective too, because we're bringing up a lot of the points, and the kids don't get smarter unless the adults get smarter. You know, developing a culturally relevant curriculum is one thing, but you put it on paper. But, you know, how is a teacher going to teach about Claudette Colvin or Twice Towards Justice, it's not something that they believe in and they're passionate. These are decisions we have to make as administrators. Now, who are we putting in front of our kids? Are they going to do right by it? Are they in it for to do what's right by our students in particular? You know, we got to look locally. Like Uwe and myself, we share Representative Bobby Gibson, who has done a tremendous amount of work, positive work in the state and nationally. You know, so I think the adults, it is an uncomfortable conversation, but again, going back to the relationships piece and the honesty and the trust, and making sure that our staff are as passionate as we are about our kids and the curriculum that we put in front, because to teach our kids like what those before them experienced, what activism looked like, is very, very important. And to have the right people in front of kids doing that is extremely important.
No, I want to talk a little bit about what Dan said, because we can sit here on this platform, and he's 100% right. And there's one variable that we as school leaders must keep at the forefront, because we can sit here and we can pontificate about all the different things we want to do, and we will do those things. But let's call it what it is: to be anti-racist, okay? And this goes back to what Missy spoke about. It takes courage, leadership courage, okay? And it's one of those things where if we know the work is this important, you know, we have to deal in some sense, you know, with the community and the politics in the community. Some people who may not share the same ideologies about the work that's important for children, so on and so forth. But there is a piece of this that's going to require us to look at that person in the mirror and say that this work is going to be hefty in front of us. And we need to find that inner courage to stand the test of time, because it's reasonable it won't end tomorrow. So what kind of courage do we need? Where else can we pull support from to be able to do this work? So when Nilda said that child looked her in the face and said, what are we going to do? That's accountability. You're putting it on us. And that's, I mean, I wish you had 300 kids who were just like that, right? But let's not be absent-minded in the fact that a lot of this work as people in positions of influence easily has to come from our desk, from our mouths, from the conversations that we have, from the hallways that we walk, from the conversations we have with regional and local representatives, with state representatives. It's going to require us to be brave, okay? And sometimes being brave in a political sense means you can't worry too much about what too many people think, when what is important in front of you are the eyes of those little children that you see every day. Okay, so I really just want to be clear about that, because none of this work is going to be easy. We're going to have to humble ourselves. We have to get comfortable being uncomfortable and have those difficult conversations, even if it's with people with opposing or divergent perspectives.
I totally agree. And I'm sitting here thinking, you know what, we have to be the agents of change, and we have to find the courage within ourselves. I so agree with you, Uli. So my last question for you today is, because we're running out of time, like I said, we could do this all day long, and we're going to have to get together and continue these conversations. But my last question, to kind of summarize your thinking, and I want to hear from everybody, is we as leaders must commit to change, not just in words, but in actions. What change or changes would you like to see for your school and or district, and what actions need to be taken to make these changes become the new normal? What are your final thoughts? And Sherrod, why don't we start with you?
That is a multi-layered question there, Rosie.
I know, I love to get those deep thought questions.
You know, in a nutshell, because I do want to allot time for our other panelists, I think that we need to create systems and structures where students, and again, my lens is elementary. So I'm going to say at a very young age, and when I say young age, I mean pre-K and earlier, know how to engage in honest but socially appropriate dialogue. You know, that is a mountainous task. But my thinking around that is biases that are centered around race and economic status, etc., they're learned, right? Children, I don't believe that children are inherently born with those biases. And I work around little children all day long. So I think that we need to provide those structures and those systems where they can be honest and they can learn to listen and they can learn to articulate how they feel about something.
Thank you. Joy.
So I think I really feel proud of my district and what they're doing to keep this at the forefront. We have an equity and diversity coordinator that's official this year. And so, but it's not just her job, right? And so we all have to kind of join in this work. And I think at the school level, thinking about how we make sure that students are at the forefront of this conversation and giving them the opportunity to do that. So one piece I can say is that, we have a club and I'm like, I need to fund the club, right? Like I need to fund, instead of it being something else, if I want this work to continue, I need to fund it for those teachers to say, this is so valuable, I'm going to find the money to make sure that you can have regular meetings, that it's not so that students can have an active voice and be the leaders that we say we want them to be. We have to create multiple opportunities so that no one's kind of struggling for time to do that. So that's the biggest thing for student voice. And then I'll say for staff, it's constantly figuring out how do we provide opportunities for staff to engage in this conversation and in the work so that they can feel comfortable. Whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's race, whatever the issue is around social justice, here's the piece. I'm like, I need you to understand your role here is to create safe spaces for our kids. That's your role. And if you can't do that, like move through your discomfort, then this isn't the place for us to be, because our job is to create safe spaces, civil spaces, constructive spaces for kids. And we need to make sure we move our own personal stuff out of the way or deal with our own personal stuff so that that can actually happen. And so my big thing is students. So how do I make sure that they're at the forefront? And in addition to funding it, I'm going to be talking to Nilda.
Okay, Tim.
Yeah, I just to build on something that Joy just said, I do think that especially coming out of this such an isolated environment, it's hard to know exactly where individual students are and how they're comprehending what they're seeing. And so I think to some extent, no matter what the fall looks like, we're going to have a boatload of work to do at the outset of trying to gather information to help us better understand their comprehension of events. And then ensuring that our curriculum, our social justice curriculum, identifies areas for them to have deeper discussions, and that our teachers feel confident about leading those discussions. I also think, given the great disparities that came up at the beginning of the conversation between and among school districts and inequities, I do think years ago, a long time ago, more than 20 years ago when I was teaching in Danbury, we used to do exchanges with other schools where we could break down barriers and stereotypes that existed between our school and the suburban schools. And I do think we need to do more of that work. I think there does need to be visitations between schools to break down stereotypes. And I think that will help us in the long run for students to be able to learn and understand and listen and hear perspectives from others. I think it's vitally important for us to do that work. And I don't think you can experience that any other way unless you're sitting with students and having those discussions. I think it's impossible to do it otherwise.
Very difficult during these times when we're doing our physical and social distancing, I have to say. Nilda.
I think that's a very difficult question to answer, but I'm just so excited that I have my district supporting me in the work of trying to lead an anti-racist school. Some of the things that they're doing is they changed core beliefs. They added a core belief, equity matters. And in that core belief, the language is anti-racist. It talks about rooting out inequity as a vision and mission for all of our schools. And now we're hosting more and more book groups to get informed. And we're meeting virtually to talk about the books. So one of the books that we're reading is How to Be an Anti-Racist. And our principals are going to meet. Joy, no way.
I see, I knew you guys had to talk together, but maybe that's a book we need to read this summer as well. So thank you.
So we're going to meet informally just to talk about our thoughts and beliefs around it. And there are so many more books that we are going to order and read just to learn more, because there is a lot of learning to do. My experience isn't someone else's experience, so there is so much work to be done there. So I agree with Joy. We need to empower students. We need to empower teachers. We need to validate experiences when our students tell us that something happened to them and it felt unequitable and it didn't feel right to them. We need to believe them when they share those stories. I did hear from a mom. I told her I would be participating in this talk. And I said, so what do you think? She has a Black male son, and she was worried about her son's safety in light of George Floyd. And I said, what would you recommend for teachers? What do I say to my faculty and staff? And she said, the teacher, she referenced a specific teacher. She said, this teacher made sure that my son saw himself on the walls. She made sure that his history and culture mattered every time she talked about literature. She encouraged him to showcase his voice at a Black History Month poetry slam, and she helped him believe that his voice mattered. Immediately after the George Floyd news, she called to check in on him and scheduled a Google Meet to process what happened nationally. And she ended the letter with, he knew his life mattered when his teacher reached out and to check in on him. So I just think, let's check in on our kids. Let's show them how much we care. And let's do the work that's necessary to change our schools.
Thank you. Dan.
Yeah, hi. Personally, I think Bloomfield Public Schools is at the forefront of creating, not just creating, but maintaining change and equity for our students and providing opportunities, because we're not diverse. We live it. We live it every day. So we've been fighting forever for our students. One thing that, one change, or something that I would like to build more upon just the foundation is encouraging our students to be active in their own communities, to be active in Bloomfield, to be active in the state, and not just support a cause, but be the voice of change, and not just stand in the back, but be an activist and create and maintain change.
Thank you. Louis.
Yeah, I agree with Nilda and Joy and everybody else. This is a rather complex question. There's so much to be done. But there is a prevailing thought in organizational theory that says that a system usually does what it's designed to do, So for us, we've been deep in this equity work, and that's been led out of the office of Dr. Terrell Hill, our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources. But we've also been blessed to have really 3 dynamic new teachers who came in completely unapologetic and unafraid to dive into this work, and they have led a good amount of our equity work from the ground up. I also have an assistant principal who is passionate about this work, who has really taken the lead on our Black History Month program that we have kind of made sure ripples into the rest of the school year. But more than anything, we've done a pretty deep examination of our school improvement plan and wrote some things directly into the school improvement plan that requires culturally responsive teaching. And we've looked at existing policies and processes such as our discipline policy and our grading policy, which has, in my opinion, has some undertones of exclusionary practices. And we have commissioned committees to take a look at it, redesign it, and all of those committees have student representatives. So if we are looking for an outcome that's going to benefit all students, we are taking a look at the structures, processes, and systems that we have in place, and we're trying to make sure we redesign it to fit the needs that we have.
Great, thank you. And Missy.
Yeah, I think I want to share the story that I did with the panel presenters before we opened up for our meeting, I reconnected with a former student who is a proud graduate of Windsor High School. He's in his mid-30s right now. And we were chatting last night, and, you know, he said, as a Black male growing up in Windsor, he goes, I thought that was the American experience that everyone had. He said, you know, he moved away soon after graduating and is thoroughly disgusted with even some of what his good friends are, you know, throughout. And he travels the world. He's a musician, travels the world. He says, I didn't realize how fortunate I was to grow up in a community where it was just so organic and, you know, the acceptance. So I'm hearing this from a young man in his mid-30s who had that strong foundation. Imagine our Black children coming to us who don't have that strong foundation and feeling of acceptance and belonging early on. You know, in our district, we have made some deliberate efforts to relook at our curriculum, absolutely 100% to make shifts. Most recently, we have made a variety of books. We've purchased books and are available in our public library for our children, for our families. We have a teacher resource page. And like I said, it is time for action. I think we need to look back at the trainings we have done with staff, and we need to push a little deeper. It was a genuine effort. But again, I think we have to push a little harder. And, you know, I am looking forward to the work that we will be doing with CREC. To do some needs assessment and do the hard work. And as someone said, the heavy lift that's ahead of us.
Great, and it is going to be a heavy lift. I can't thank you all so much for coming on today for this panel. You have, if people go back and listen to what all of you have said, there are so many different ideas, resources, and suggestions for next action steps that people can take. So thank you so much. Also, I know in the chat there were a lot of questions, but especially a question about books, and some of you have suggested resources and books. I think what I'll try to do is collect that resource list from some of you, and then we can put that out on our website so that people can look at that. And if anyone's listening and you want to send me a book, name of a book, or books that you've used in your school, please do that. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to address all of our questions, which means that definitely we need to make sure that we do this round table conversation again. And as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking we might even want to do a virtual summit, because there's just so much to talk about and so much to say. I do, however, want to thank all of our members participating in the roundtable conversation. I also want to thank everyone who joined us today for this deep and very serious conversation about racism. Because racism, social injustice, and inequity are systemic issues that require not just cosmetic but structural changes. We have a lot of work ahead, as you all have said, a lot of heavy lifting locally across the state, the country, and around the world. Let's make this our first of many conversations that lead us as educators across Connecticut to create positive changes and have lasting impacts. So thank you to all.